Good evening all and welcome. Babysitting can be fun and rewarding, but there are times that it can be downright horrifying, as you are about to find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened a very long time ago, back in 1973. I know it was summer and that I was 6 years old. We were living on Monica Lane in Madison, Wisconsin. The thing is, I sort of recalled it but never put two and two together until a few months ago when I was talking to my mum, who went into it in great detail. I was a very gregarious child, outgoing, extroverted, friends with anyone. It was at that time a middle-class neighborhood, and 3 houses down from ours, on the same side of the street, was a huge park. My mum was a nurse, and my dad was a salesman. But my mum worked second shift to Merita, while my dad worked days. I rarely had a babysitter, only if they went out for dinner or a movie. But they did go out often, and there were always older kids in the neighborhood to babysit. One sitter who I really liked lived a few blocks away or so, and down the street a little. Vicky had babysat me a few times before, and everything was pretty uneventful. She'd play games with me, and do my hair, play dress-up, pretty basic stuff. So anyhow, one day I had gone with my friends down to the park. I remember there was a ball field at the time, and a sand lot next to the field. My friends wanted to play on the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. I looked at the sandbox and saw that my babysitter Vicky was standing there. I told my friends I was going to go down to the sandbox and ran off. We played in the sand building a castle, and then she asked me if I wanted to get something cold to drink. It was stifling hot, and of course I say yes. So she takes my hand and we start walking to her place. She starts telling me about her puppies and asking if I wanted to play with them. Of course I get giddy and now can't wait to get to her house. This is where my memory stopped, and after my mom filled me in, the rest of it flooded back. My mother just happened to be talking to my sister and I about some of the places we lived at, and we got to Monica Lane. I told her I remembered the park and how big it seemed, and she asked me if I remembered being kidnapped. I immediately thought she was kidding, and then the look on her face told me otherwise. She said it was around 5 in the afternoon. One of my friends had come to the door to ask me to come back outside, sure that I had gotten bored and walked back home. When my mother checked the house, she realized I wasn't there, and was 7 months pregnant with my sister. She sprints to the park screaming my name. After asking several kids if they'd seen me with no clue, she went off to the ball field and asked the older boys if they'd seen me. One of the boys, who was around 14, said that he'd seen a younger woman playing with a girl that fit my description in the sand, and walked off in that general direction. But that was all he knew. My mum ran across the street to one of the houses and asked to use their phone and call the police. By the time the police got there, my dad had come home and some of the neighbors were trying to help my mum. So there's this search party out looking for me, screaming my name and knocking on doors. The police had gone back to the park to ask the boys if they knew who had been with me, and if they knew who she was. Between the boys and the neighbors, they had deduced who it was that had led me off, but I have no idea how. The police and the entourage go to her home, as she lived with her parents but they weren't home, and knocked on the door. She came to the door and told them that she hadn't seen me, and that she'd been home all day. The police asked to come in, and for some reason she said it was fine. They went through the house and found me in the basement. That's what my mum knew, and then I remembered. It was literally like a floodgate had opened, and I started crying. At 6, you sort of trust everyone, and she'd been in our home. I'd never got a bad feeling from her, and my parents didn't either. But when we walked into her house, I remember that cold feeling washing over me and getting very worried. I remember starting to cry and saying I wanted to go home over and over. She takes me into her kitchen and gets me a glass of water and a tissue. I hear dogs barking, and next to the kitchen is an open stairway that goes down, and that's where the barks were coming from. She then starts trying to make me go downstairs, telling me there's all sorts of toys and games. I reluctantly agree, and she grabs my hand and heads down the stairs. The dogs are going nuttier, and I start screaming. At this point, Vicky is getting bizarre. She's screaming at me to shut up, and that if I don't, she'll throw me in the cage with the dogs and they'll eat me, dragging me down the stairs while I scream. I was scared out of my mind. I remember crying so hard that I was hyperventilating, and I'm screaming so hard I can't even make a sound. Vicky then flips a switch and starts being syrupy sweet, trying to calm me down. She tells me that she was just playing a game and that she wants to play hide and seek. She must have been relatively skilled at calming me down, because the next thing I know I hear knocking on the door upstairs and I wasn't crying. The houses were all the same sort of tract houses that Sears used to sell, so not huge but not small, and you could hear everything at any spot in the house. I keep hearing the knocking and she tells me that it's her friend. They're coming to play hide and seek, and she convinced me to let her put a piece of masking tape over my mouth so that I wouldn't make a sound, and lifted me into this big wooden box next to the kennel. She put a big pile of blankets over me and told me to be really quiet so they don't find me. The whole time the dogs were going crazy, but then she calmed me down. They calmed down too. They still looked incredibly mean, but were no longer frothing at the mouth and only slightly growling, until the knocking started. I remember scrunching in there confused, still scared and convinced that the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I was crying again and hyperventilating. I remember taking the tape off my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but remembered I needed to be quiet because I was afraid of what she'd do to me if I screamed. I laid in that smelly box next to a big bag of dog food, sweating to hell, tears rolling down my face. I sort of pushed the blankets side to side, only enough that I could pull them back over me when someone came. I recall thinking about my dad and wondering if he would come to find me. All of a sudden, I hear what sounds like adults yelling my name. They come down the stairs, and the dogs are going crazy. Over and over, men are yelling my name, and I swear I hear a man say that if she doesn't shut up those dogs, that he will. I was in a large storage box, like a carpenter toolbox type thing, with tape hanging off my mouth when they opened the lid. I remember a very nice man asking my name and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in anything other than screams and tears and grabbing his neck so hard my dad had to practically pry me off him. I remember my parents taking me to the hospital to be checked out, and that's all I remember really. Mum said that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and last she knew was that she was in prison, but couldn't remember when the last time that she heard anything was. We moved from the area shortly after, and have not been back since. I do know that Mum said her parents were odd, but that they didn't really know them. She had met Vicky from neighbours that had used her as a babysitter and had never heard of anything bad, and I always seemed happy with her. She lived in the general neighbourhood, but it would have been 2 blocks over and 1 block down. Mum said they never picked her up. She always walked over. When they'd drive her home but would never notice anything out of the ordinary. Mum and Dad had only met her parents when they came to the door to ask for forgiveness, that Vicky hadn't meant to do anything bad and was a good girl. Mum said that my dad picked her dad up by the shirt and told them that if they ever came on our property again, he'd kill them. I remember her name and sort of what she looked like, but would have no idea if she walked up to me today. I was babysitting one night for a family friend about 4 years ago. I had put the kids to bed and crashed on the couch while waiting for my mum and the friend to get back from a night out. Randomly, I woke up and just remember being very confused about why I was even awake. That was until I heard the front door close. A key thing to note here is the fact the only sound was the door closing. There was no sound of it being locked, and this lock was very loud. I assumed it was my mum and her friend coming back, so I sat up preparing to leave. However, I quickly noticed the lack of their voices. They are never quiet after a night out, especially because their friend has always had some drinks, and also noticed that there was only one set of footsteps. For a moment, I considered the possibility of it being the friend's husband coming home to grab something. He was a firefighter and was at the station for one of his 24-hour shifts. I could hear the person walking around the front room and going to the table in there and shuffling through some papers as if frantically searching for something. The more I listened, though, the more it just didn't feel right. I pretty quickly dropped the idea of it being the husband and jumped to the idea of it being an intruder. Being around 15 at the time, I was no way brave enough to confront any intruder that broke into the house. I managed to scoot along a wall leading to the front room before becoming completely paralyzed by fear. I ended up promising myself I would keep my presence hidden until the person walked upstairs to the kids or back towards me. I could hear them pacing around a lot, papers and items being shuffled though. Eventually, I heard the footsteps start to come down the hall before turning into the bathroom, which was before they could reach me on the stairs. Only seconds after the footsteps walked into the bathroom, I heard the front door unlock. This ties back to the beginning, because it really struck out the door was never locked, and I can remember every single sound from the second I woke up. Immediately I heard my mum and the friend talking loudly, and part of me was relieved, while the other part of me was prepared to hear them scream upon finding an intruder in the bathroom that's too small to hide in. Shockingly, they just walked straight past it, and Mum told me to get my stuff so that we could go home. I was still listening the entire time, and the bathroom door never closed, and no further footsteps were heard. As I finally walked down the hall to the door, I scanned the bathroom. The door was wide open. The window was shut, and it was too small to fit anyone but kids through, and there was no one crouched in the darkness. There was absolutely nothing off about the house, no windows open in any of the first floor, and nobody left between my mum coming back and us leaving. Nothing. I'm a skeptic. I like to think this may have been an intruder, but cannot think of any logical way they could have hid there and left somehow. The friend never found an intruder or noticed any missing items. Nothing makes sense. All I know is that night is vividly ingrained in my mind, too vividly to be a dream, and I still get that feeling of something not being right whenever I think about it. One time I was babysitting in the middle of nowhere, up at the mountains of the coast. I remember it was around 9 p.m, and the kids' parents would be getting home in like an hour or so. I had put the kids to bed, so was downstairs by myself watching TV. However, every so often the TV would flicker with static. To be honest, it was starting to scare the crap out of me. It wasn't until the point when I looked up from the TV to find the nearby window when I lost it. There wasn't actually anything outside, but it seemed as if it was in the reflection. I saw what looked like a tin man standing not too far from me behind the couch. Needless to say, there wasn't actually anything there when I snapped my head back around to look at the spot where it was standing in the reflection. I grabbed all my stuff and wanted to get out of that house, there and then. But I had to run upstairs and actually sat down quietly while the kids were sleeping and waited for them to return. For some reason, even though they were sleeping kids, being in company calmed me a bit. I particularly remember when the parents came home and I had started to leave. I was pulling out of their driveway in my terrible old Ford Laser, and I looked up into the kids' bedroom. The same reflection I saw earlier was looking back down at me with a raised hand, as if waving goodbye. And after that, I never babysat again. This happened to me when I was around 7. I'm currently 19, and have almost forgotten about it. But after reading and listening to many of these stories, it flooded back to my mind. So let me take you back 12 years. At the time, I had a full-time nanny who lived with us. She was from a different country, so when she went back to her home country for visiting, we often got a temporary nanny. So that year, she left for her yearly visit, and a temporary nanny called Tina came to live with us. She was around her late 20s, decent looking, and the only thing about her that I remember was that she never really smiled much. So the week goes on, nothing really suspicious happened. The only thing that was weird was that whenever I came back from school, she was always sweating and breathing heavily. Never thought much of it back then. The weekend comes along and my parents were still young, so their Friday ritual was to head to the clubs after dinner. That night we had dinner out, they dropped me off, and I took the lift up to the house. As I got out of the lift, I noticed a man from the corner of my eye, but tried not to pay him any mind, because all I was thinking of was getting home before my show started. So I rush in just to see Tina crying. Being a kid, I asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing. I just left and continued my show. As I was watching my show, Tina said she was going to the shops for a bit, and asked me to stay home and not move. 3 minutes in, Tina runs back into the house crying, locked the door, ran into her room and locked herself in. I got my munchkin-like body out of the sofa confused as hell. Before I could get to Tina's room, someone began banging on the door. I didn't understand anything that was going on, as the guy was shouting in some random accent. Thinking back, it's probably some dialect from India. This went on for about half an hour, and Tina was nowhere in sight. So finally the ruckus stops and my curiosity gets the best of me. I unlocked the door ever so slightly and peeped through the gap. It was sort of dark, but it looked like a shadow was trying to hide behind the wall. I opened the door a little more and said, "Hello?" I kid you not, at that very moment, this dude starts sprinting towards my door, and I slammed and locked it immediately. I went straight to bed, hearing him going at the front door again for what seemed like forever, until eventually I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning with my mum's sweet voice. The weird part was that Tina acted as if nothing happened. I didn't tell my breakfast anything, but while having breakfast I heard my dad going on about how there had been many beer cans at the staircase when he came back early that morning. The day after, Tina left, and my usual nanny returned, and everything came back to normal. I really wonder what that was all about, and how much danger I was in. I'm a nanny, and was doing some late-night babysitting for the family I work for. All of the kids were in bed, asleep upstairs. I double-checked before turning on the TV, so I settled in for the last few hours before the parents were scheduled to be home. While the youngest child, who was around 3 or 4 years old at the time, runs out of his room at full speed with his polka dot blanket in tow, across the landing and into the toy room. I, of course, call up to them and instruct the little punk to get back to bed. Silence. I call out to them again. Nothing. I finally get up and go upstairs into the toy room where I find the little light on but no child. More annoyed than anything, and thinking the kids somehow snuck back into their room without me seeing them, I march across the landing to their room. Not only are they completely asleep, but they're still tucked in the way I left them, with their polka dot blanket draped over them. Okay, that's weird, I thought. I assumed my mind was playing tricks on me, and went back downstairs to finish out the night. The parents got home, and the mum and I are casually chatting about the kids, and out of nowhere she asks, "Have you seen the kid with the polka dot blanket run across the landing yet?" That's when she decided to start swapping all of the weird encounters we'd been having, and I have to say our shared mutual stories sent shivers down my spine. The one that actually scared me was when we discovered that the kids had complained of both of us hearing a heavy voice telling them to wake up while sleeping at night. I was babysitting my little brother. I was 16 and he was 4. and he would talk and fall asleep. He had quite a few imaginary friends that he would sometimes tell goodnight before he went to sleep. One night he was talking, and unlike normal I heard something in the background of the baby monitor and went up to see if one of his toys had come on. When I get there, nothing was out of the ordinary, and he told me he was talking to the old lady. I didn't think anything of it because, like I said, he has an active imagination. Fast forward a few months and we're looking through some old family photo albums, and he points to a picture and says, "That's the old lady that tells me goodnight." It was my great-grandmother, who died when I was 5. I used to babysit 2 small kids, 3 and 6 at the time, and would occasionally put them to bed. The parents told me the younger one was afraid of the dark and would probably ask me to lay in bed with him until he fell asleep. I put the 6-year-old to bed in her room and go to lay down with the little boy. About half an hour later he'd fallen asleep, and I was ready to sneak out of the room when I heard grunting and rapid flopping noises from the other kid's room. It sounded like she was having a seizure. I rushed over to find that she was flinging her arms around on the bed like a rag doll. She looked possessed. Apparently she did this almost every night because she didn't want to go to bed. Her parents didn't warn me of that before going out for the evening, and it was terrifying. I was at a friend's house one night, and she was putting her little boy to bed. Her baby monitor had a camera built in and was installed at the foot of the crib. She also had one of those mattress sensors in the crib. Well, we're sitting down watching a movie, and the receiver for the monitor is on the coffee table in front of us. The sound sensor spikes, and the screen goes white. She picks it up, and all you can make out on the screen is an eerie face. We go running to the room to see the kid is sound asleep. We look around and we don't see anything strange, so we go back to the movie. About 10 minutes later, the same thing happens. I get up quickly and sneak into his room, while she stays on the couch. I catch the kid standing up in his crib, with his face right up against the monitor. He's smiling like crazy and giggling. He looks over at me and quickly lays down and acts like he's asleep. I let her know what's up and she laughs it off. A few nights later, she tells me the same thing happened to the monitor, but that this time, the boy was sitting down on the couch next to her. I had to babysit my friend's children with a childhood friend of my own named Charlotte. The kids we were watching were 1 and 2. It was around 7:30 at the time when the parents wanted us to put the kids to bed, so I go to the bathroom and Charlotte goes to take the family dog. I have all finished my business and am washing my hands when I get a huge headache. I fall forward and bang my head on the mirror. A few seconds later I'm dizzy but alright, and I hear Charlotte come to the front door with the dog. As I come out of the bathroom, she asks me why I put the kids to bed by myself, and says that she would have helped. I told her I didn't, and got a little worried. We searched everywhere they could have conceivably gotten, but couldn't find them. Last place we looked is their shared bedroom. We walk in. There they are. The 2-year-old in his bed and the 1-year-old in the crib, both in fresh clothes and diapers. The crib had a railing twice as tall as the 2-year-old's, so we know for certain he didn't do it. The next day we came over and told their parents. Then went to talk to the 2-year-old and ask if he remembered what happened. Throughout the usual 2-year-old babbling, he said as though he thought that I had picked them up and taken them to bed. This definitely wasn't so. I still can't explain it, and years later, it still freaks me out. I was asked to babysit some young children of a friend of my mum's. The 3 boys aged 4, 7 and 9 were already in bed when I got to the house. I was just expecting to keep an eye on the children from 7 till 10 so that the parents could go out for dinner. The house was old but had a pretty cozy feeling, and so I'm settled up in front of the fire in the lounge and start studying for a biology exam. A new family kitten kept me company as I studied, sleeping on the couch next to me. I'm unsure what time it was, But all of a sudden the kitten jumped off the couch and went and stood next to the open door that led to the front entrance hallway. It just sat there staring upwards, and when I looked in the direction, a strange feeling came over me. It felt as if someone was staring at me. I felt sick and anxious, and as if whatever was staring was unsure of me. I don't know how, but I felt as if the presence was an older woman. After a few minutes, the feeling quickly disappeared, and I felt welcome in the house again. At this time, the kitten stopped staring up and joined me on the couch. I checked on the boys who were fast asleep and went back to studying. The next day I explained the experience to my mum, who then shared the experience with the mum of the kids I babysat. She told my mum that the house had been in her family for over 100 years, and the most recent death in the 1980s had been her grandmother. Her son, the 4-year-old, talks all the time about Nana and how Nana visits him in his room. She did not know what he meant until one day she was going through some old belongings and her son pointed to a photo of her grandmother saying, "That's Nana." I believe the presence I felt was the grandmother, and that she was also babysitting the children on that very night. When I was young, around 7 to 8 years old, I was napping in my room, which I shared with my younger brothers. Our bedroom consists of only 3 mattresses, put on top of 2-inch wooden paneling. My mum was afraid that if we fell in our sleep, we'd break a bone or two, and a child-sized wardrobe. There was also a floor-to-ceiling window that is strictly for decoration and cannot be opened. When I woke up from my nap, my babysitter, she is live-in, was folding our clothes. I spoke to her for a while and then went to get water. I don't remember what, but I needed to talk to her after, so I went in again, but she wasn't there. I remember thinking that it was weird. No sound of closing and opening of the door was heard in the 5 minutes that I left the bedroom to go get water. I proceeded to ask every person in the house if they see her. None of them did. So I went inside the room for a second time, searching. Maybe she somehow hid somewhere there. Still could not find her. So I went out again and searched the house before eventually going back to the bedroom for the 3rd time. There she was, sitting in the bed folding clothes like nothing had happened. I asked her where she went, and she replied, and I quote, "What are you talking about? I've been here the entire time." But I was shouting at you, asking where you kept going in and out of the room, but you wouldn't answer. She thought I was pulling a prank on her, and had me reprimanded. There are still a few other instances that happened around her, which to this day I cannot logically explain. In the early 1990s, I worked for a volunteer-based security group. We didn't have a radio license for real walkie-talkies yet, so we had a set of headsets that worked off some common household frequencies. These frequencies were used for child walkie-talkies, cheap cordless phones, drive-through speakers, baby monitors and such. During an outdoor distance test, I picked up some old lady's cordless phone, where she was talking about gross medical stuff, but she couldn't hear us to get her to stop. And while testing a battery replacement, I picked up a 2-way baby monitor in a nearby apartment. There was a baby fussing, and the sound of the woman doing some dishes. "I'll be right there, hon," the woman said. On a whim, I pushed talk on my headset and said with a loud demonic voice, "Feed me." Then I hear the shattering of dishes. This was hilarious when I was 21, but now that I'm older, I feel a little bit bad. Sorry, stranger lady. These events took place when I was about 20. I'm a female, and had a steady gig babysitting these kids that I met off my well-known university coach. She gave me the gig, and I was thrilled to go over to her house and meet her kids one day. They liked me, and I got the gig. As time went by, I'd go more and more frequently to their house to babysit. I need to describe the layout so you fully understand. This was a relatively modern London home, perhaps converted at some point, and with 2 floors, which, for me anyway, I find relatively uncommon in London, especially for just one house. You had the ground floor, which was sort of split level. Then you had the first floor and the second floor. It was a pretty nice place with more than enough room for the mum and her 2 kids. Anyway, the main thing you need to know is that the main bedroom is right above the living room. So, on to the story. I'd picked up the little girl from ballet, and the boy was already home waiting for my arrival, the mother leaving minutes before, so there being very little time in between. As usual, I fed the kids, did a few activities with them before taking them upstairs and doing the whole nighttime routine thing. When they were finally in bed, I got some time to relax to myself. I was currently ploughing through a book that she had on her bookshelf and wanted to know if I could finish it before she got home, as I was on the last few pages and had been reading it every time I babysat. It was around 11 o'clock at night. The mum hadn't come home yet, and I was very entertained in my book, when I hear a creak. The house had wooden floor, and I distinctly hear a creak and then footsteps. Now, after babysitting in this house a number of times already, I sort of identified the footsteps, but these ones I couldn't place. They didn't sound like either children, and the odd thing is, it was coming from directly above me, i.e. the mother's bedroom. The kids' bedrooms were further away, which I found a little bit odd. Part of me hoped that one of them had snuck into the mum's room and then just got off the bed, which wasn't unusual for the little girl to do. But I would always hear her get out of her bed and move across the floor. The sound was unmistakable in the eerie silence. So, I prick my ears up and listen, but I don't hear anything else. I wanted to call out. The temptation was right there, but I decide against it, thinking that if I'm wrong and I'm just imagining things, or maybe it's the house settling, then there's a good chance I'll wake the kids. So this time I decide to leave it. Give or take 5 or 10 minutes, and I hear the noise again. This time, it sounds like someone had gotten off the bed and was walking towards the child's room. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and this time my heart was telling me that there's no way this was the house settling. These were definite footsteps, made with intention. I knew this time that if someone had gotten off the bed and walked over the first time, there's no way they could have done it a second without me hearing something. A jump would have made the floor and bed sound. There is simply no way. It is impossible and unfeasible. So, I quietly made my way upstairs, and although I say quietly, the floorboard with every step I took up those stairs creaked, so it was almost like a death rattle walking up each and every step. I was convinced by the time I'd reached the top, the kids would be wide awake asking me what was going on, but fortunately for me, there wasn't. I get to the top of the stairs and look down the hallway. The door to the mother's room is open, perfectly open, and I can see inside just fine. The girl's room is right next to her mother's and is closed. The boy's door is behind me and is also closed. I think to myself, there's no way they would have opened and closed those doors so quietly, and a cold chill goes down my back. What if it's an intruder? I tell myself, and now I get on high alert. I try and dampen my footsteps, despite the fact that each one makes a pronounced creak, almost seeming like each one louder than the last. I slowly and carefully tiptoe my way across the loud floor until I reach the mother's room and switch the light on. I examine the windows, which I admit was something I had never up until this point done before. I'd never needed to. I'd started babysitting in the summer, and it was always the afternoon or evening when I came, so it was relatively cool by then anyway, and it was winter now. deep winter. No reason to open those. I noticed that they would be impossible to open from the outside, at least not without making a considerable amount of noise and damage. They had a funny little latch that could only be opened from the inside that was actually connected to the board underneath it, so I thought it was very improbable. After having a few tugs, I recognized this was definitely not a point of entry, which just left upstairs. Could have someone got in from the second floor, come down the stairs, and then and only then made the sound? It really depended if the stairs going upstairs made sounds at all. And as I made my way up the stairs to check, each and every step creaked just as I knew it would. When I reached the top, I looked around this loft room. There wasn't much there. A few boxes and a bed and a toilet, nowhere to hide in or behind, and I looked under the bed and in the only closet in the room. Where the hell could this mystery person have come from? The sky window was closed, and again, something you could only open from the inside without making a considerable ruckus. So, resigning myself to it must have been in my imagination, I made my way downstairs, but still with goosebumps. A few minutes later, after I had just started resuming my read, did I hear a noise again. The familiar creak. What sounded like footsteps again, but this time they were coming towards the stairs, and they stopped shy of the top step. I didn't move this time. I didn't want to see. I felt like whatever this was playing with me, and it knew it was getting on my nerves and scaring me. I closed the book and just sat there, containing the urge to wet myself in fear. Fortunately for me, the mum came back a few minutes later, and when she asked me what was wrong, I tried to explain to her about the creak, but she cut me off fast and said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We have a ghost." It came out so casually. I asked her if she was sure and how she knew. She said that she'd been living here for a number of years and that she always has problem with sounds, and it always sounds like people are walking about. She said that her kids have even said a few times that they've seen what looks like a shadow out of their corner of their eye. And there was even one occasion when her daughter was younger, when she asked who the lady singing to her at night was. That was about the final straw for me. I said thank you, got paid and left. It took a while before the lady asked me to babysit again, and I really wanted to say no from fear, but decided to give it one more shot. And after coming back, I never saw or heard anything ever again. But from time to time, as we chat before I leave, the mum would tell me about her experiences, if anything interesting or fresh happened. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, be sure to let me know in the usual way. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my members and my patrons for your regular help and support. It really does mean a hell of a lot and helps me to keep making videos. So thanks, guys. I don't know if you saw in the community tab, but I've actually started a new channel called Mr. Knox. It's shorter videos, 3, 5, just a small amount of stories, and well, it's got visuals as well. I really wanted to marry it together, just do something on this channel with visuals, but I don't want to sound exasperated, but I know a lot of you guys are a big fan of the black screen, and it's just kind of that compromise, really, because, well, I just want to express myself creatively and do something new and interesting, but without taking away what you guys are already enjoying and used to. So yeah, if you guys would like to check that out, it would really mean a lot to me. And, you know, subscribe there and check out the videos and stuff. I will be posting every week, I think on a Tuesday, because that's not a Mortis Media Day, so it can be a Mr. Knox Day. So yeah, it'd be great if if you want to keep listening another day to get another slice of Mort per se, then you can just check that out. That'd be wonderful. Alright then, guys. I think I'm going to wrap things up here. So stay awesome, stay safe, pick your babysitters wisely, and I'll see you in the next one.